Hello and welcome to Veggie Plan A, another cooking demonstration by Sifang Temple here in San Diego. So today I will be your cook demonstrator. My name is Angelica and I am a volunteer here at the temple. I will be making vegan, gluten-free, Buddhist-friendly tamales for you today. So these are our main ingredients. But before we get started, let me explain why I'm calling them Buddhist friendly. And that is because in Mexico, all of our recipes typically have garlic and onions. And the recipe today will not have those two key ingredients. So I will be making some adjustments. And part of that is because one of the key ingredients for the tamales is that they use lard, but we're going to be using vegetable shortening, which is very important for our recipe. And I'll have all that information in the recipe for you. Now, tamal, the word tamal comes from the Nahuatl language, tamal. And that is one of the types of languages from the Aztec civilization. So anytime you wrap either rice or dough into the sleeve and you steam it, that's really in essence a type of tamal. To get started to making tamales is think about your ingredients. So the key ingredients for making tamales really, this is your basic ingredient, maseca, which is corn flour. This is how you make corn flour tamales. For making tamales, you're going to need salt, you're going to need baking powder, and you're going to need a fat. And because these are going to be vegan, we're using vegetable shortening. However, traditionally, be aware that if you buy them at the store, they do have lard in them, which is typically pork lard. And you need corn husks. These will be used for wrapping when we steam them. And we'll need some water. So that's the basic thing that you need for making the actual tamal. But you do see a lot of ingredients here on the table. And that is because of the veggie filling that I'm making for you. So today's filling is going to have impossible meat veggie. It's going to have carrots and potatoes. We also have garbanzo beans that here I've already prepared and they're cooked and already steamed for you. And in addition to it, there's a lot of little extra ingredients just to make the filling extra flavorful. So we have pepper, pasilla, chile molido, which is just a type of pepper that is ground into powder, that is a Mexican type of seasoning. We have some mushroom seasoning, 2 types of tomato that I'm using. I'm using puree and diced. I'm also using pinto beans, and I also use puree lentil beans. The reason that I use the extra beans is just to give it extra protein. Also, because it's a vegan recipe, I have 2 types of vegan cheeses here that you can use. And if you don't have lentils, you can think of any other types of puree beans like millet. Millet is a perfect way to thicken your sauce. So this is just an example. This we have at the temple. So now we're going to start our preparation phase. So be prepared to spend a few hours of cooking and boiling in the kitchen, but that's okay. You can do multiple things at the time. The very first thing that you want to do is you want to grab your garbanzo beans dried, or if you want to simplify it, you can use a canned already cooked garbanzos. I use dried. So I set these for a few hours to rinse, then I throw away the water, then I rinse them overnight. And that's what I did. Then I set them to boil. Now our garbanzo beans do take a lot of time, but they're very delicious and nutritious. So they can take 2 to 3 hours maybe if you boil them. So just be prepared that they do take that time. Make sure if you're not used to cooking beans that you have enough water in them so that they don't burn. Once you're ready, so you're gonna start this the day before with the garbanzo beans. First step. So the next thing you're going to do, I use baby carrots and these small potatoes. Just because it's easy, I don't have to chop as much from the beginning. But because they are slightly big, I did cut them in half. So you'll notice they're cut in half. These are already boiled. Once you have these ready, then you're going to get your cutting board and you're gonna cut them into small pieces, so dice them. And you wanna think about the dicing approximately about the same size of the garbanzo, give or take. It doesn't need to be perfect, but just be mindful that the consistency is somewhat balanced, okay? So you have that going. It is optional. I prefer to add a little bit of extra protein so when you're eating, you're very satisfied. So I chose this time because I had already in my fridge some Impossible patties to use. But you can use any type of veggie meat. You can choose not to put the veggie meat already since you're using a lot of beans in your recipe. So it's already gonna be pretty delicious as it is and nutritious. Okay, so if you are doing any meat, I don't have a pot here, but you set up a pot with a little bit of oil, some of your seasoning. Like I said, I use a lot of this mushroom seasoned powder that I got at Trader Joe's, and just regular pepper. So just those two ingredients, some avocado oil. Once you've grilled the Impossible burgers, what you want to make sure is to take a paper towel and just remove a little bit of the excess oil if you wanted to have a little bit of less fat. However, if you want to keep that extra juicy flavor from the seasoning and the meat, you can keep it. Just wanted to mention a little tip if you wanted to reduce a little bit of the fat. Now, turn off your fire so it's not heating anymore, and then with any kitchen instrument like a spoon, just make sure you mash all the Impossible burger so that it becomes basically ground meat. Okay, you're gonna set that aside once it's ready. You're going to, now that you have all those prep ingredients, you're going to move on to your blender and we're going to make this sauce. And this is really important. So for your sauce, you are going to be using your blender. And at the end, you're going to end up with a very similar sauce to this one, but it's going to be more thick. This is basically a tomato-based salsa that I'm gonna talk a little bit later, but it'll have similar ingredients. And that is, you're going to have some tomato into it. You'll have some pinto beans, and all the quantities are specified in the recipe instructions. You're going to have any leftover broth from when you were cooking those lentils. So remember that I said to keep all that broth. So you're going to have that broth in it. You're going to add, for a little bit of extra flavor, some jalapeno. The lemon is actually for later, sorry. So just the jalapeno, some cilantro. We call it typically cilantro here in California, but some people may know it as coriander. So that just in case if you're not familiar with cilantro. It's just a very nice fragrant leaf that gives it extra flavor. So you're going to put all your ingredients that I mentioned into the blender, also some garbanzo beans, and you're gonna blend that. Once you have it ready, you're gonna put it in your pot where your veggie meat that is already grounded is. Now you're going to mix it around. You're going to add your cooked carrots and potatoes that you already diced. You're going to add those garbanzo beans that you cooked that you have ready. So remember, this key ingredient is going to, key filling is going to have Impossible meat. It's going to have the garbanzo beans, the potatoes and the carrots, and the sauce that is going to give it the color and the flavor. And those are your key ingredients for this filling. Once you're on your stovetop, you're gonna have that flame to medium or medium heat, and then just stir it around. If you wanted extra flavor, you can add a little bit of more of that mushroom seasoning or any type of your regular seasoning that you like at home. I added pepper and seasoning. And then you mix it around. Give it a few tastes to make sure that the flavors are all well combined and balanced. And to top it, once you're done, I will recommend some cheese, just so that your recipe has a little bit of that extra cheesy flavor with it. And then you turn it off and you're done with your filling. So now that you've completed the filling, this is to give you an idea of how it is going to look. So it's going to be very thick, and you want to aim that it's not juicy. And that's important, that it's not liquidy, because when you're putting it in the dough later for the tamal, you don't want any of that extra running. So just make sure that it's a nice thick consistency, that the colors are balanced in terms of your carrots, your potatoes, and your garbanzo beans with the meat. So I know that I've done a lot of show on what I've already pre-prepared to make it simple for today's recording, but we will get into how to do tamales after one more step, and that is in your blender. After you're done the filling sauce, you're going to have some left over that is going to be thick. So leave that in the blender. Like I mentioned, it's going to be very similar ingredients. So now you're going to do is add 1 can of the tomato diced into it. Now you're going to add that lemon. If you want it spicier, you can add more pepper, and then add about a cup of cilantro into it, okay? And you're going to take all those ingredients and you're going to blend them into a nice liquidy tomato sauce. And this sauce is going to be used at the end when you're all done and about to enjoy your tamales. You're going to use it as a dressing on your tamales. Halfway through the process, you're done with all the cooking of the filling. Now we're going to make the dough. So for the ingredients for the dough, as I mentioned, the key ingredients is going to be your maseca, your corn flour. For shortening, typically when you want to use vegetable shortening, we're all familiar with Crisco. However, if you go to stores that have stores, you can find a little bit of a more nutritious shortening. So this is what I have here as well. The other 2 ingredients that you're going to need is just some salt and some baking powder and some water. So let's get the ingredients. So we already talked about the ingredients you're going to use. So we're going to start first in a big container to put in all your dry goods. So we're going to start with the maseca flour. I just happen to have some separately. For this recipe, we're using 2.5 cups. Okay, so I'm going to just pour in 2.5 cups. There are going to be some air pockets in the flour, so just try to press a little bit if you need to, and then pour a little bit more so that you have a good approximation. So we have now 2.5 cups of the maseca corn flour. Your next ingredient is going to be 1 tablespoon of salt. So you want to be careful on loading up your salt. So that is 1. Your next ingredient is going to be 1 tablespoon of your baking powder. This is very important since you are going to be baking these in the steaming process. For this, I have a nice big spout, so I'm going to go inside the container and approximate so that it's leveled off, and that is 1 tablespoon of my baking powder. Once I have the dry ingredients, the next thing you want to do is you want to mix all those dry ingredients together. So just keep mixing, just looking at the color difference to see that everything is more or less mixed in. Okay, once you see that your dry ingredients are pretty good mixed in, you're going to add 1.25 cups of water. Now here's the tip with the water. Traditionally you use any type of broth, like chicken or chicken broth. However, we're making it vegetarian. So our options could be using water or veggie broth, or the option is if you had any other of the juice from the veggie cooking, you can use that as well. So if you're using water, my recommendation is that you try to use room temperature or warm water. That would be the ideal. So we're going to use, as the recipe calls for, 1.25 cups. So this is my cup. Okay, so I am going to measure 1 cup, and I'm going to set it aside, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then I have a 1/4 cup container, and I'm going to set up a 1/4 cup. Now the reason that I'm setting the water aside is that online the tips are that you add in the water slowly as you're mixing in. And it is possible that you may need a little bit of more water depending on how hydrated the dough ends up being. So just word of advice that even though there are an amount specific, you may need a little bit more water, and that just takes experience with telling it. So I'm going to pour in about half of my first cup. You can use your hands or you can use a spatula. I'm going to use a spatula right now just so that I don't get too messy in the process. If you're doing it at home, the nice thing is that you're next to the kitchen sink, so you can keep on rinsing your hands because you are going to get messy, so expect that. Okay, so once you see that, I'm going to add the other half. So I see that my flour looks a bit dry, so I'm already thinking ahead. I'm probably going to need a little bit more water. The other difference could be maybe the temperature of the water affects how the flour is coming together. Okay, so right now it's all crumbly, so it's getting moist. I'm going to add the rest of my water. Okay, so I'm feeling a little bit more confident that it's coming together to add enough water there. Okay, and I see that it's still a little bit dry, so I'm going to add another 1/4 of a cup into my container and just add it on top. So far I've used 1.5 cups of water. Okay, these are things that come with experience, with how you're doing it. Okay, so I'm just going at this point to go in with my hand. Consistency coming together, so I'm starting to see now a nice color. So it's looking uniform, it's looking less powdery. You want to grab clumps and you can rub in the edges just to get all the dry powder. So you want to make sure that everything in your bowl, in your hands, if you have anything stuck together there, that everything is coming together and moist. This bowl is just easier for me to work with. I'm just going to set this nice ball to the side. And now I'm going to work on my shortening. So this is probably the messiest part out of the whole thing because you're working with vegetable shortening. Okay. As I said, you have 2 options that I'm presenting. Crisco, people are familiar with this, or you can use a more of a fancier version of it. For this recipe, we are going to use 8 ounces. 8 ounces is about a cup. Okay. So I am going to first load up a cup, and then I'm going to work on this bowl. So I am going to just basically scoop. It has the same consistency as lard or as butter. So you want to make sure that when you're loading it to your container, that you're packing it in so that you make sure that you have enough. So I'm going to set it up flat here on the side so you can see. So all I'm doing is just kind of packing it so that I know that I'm aiming at that approximate 8 ounces for a cup, which is what I'm doing. So that is about 1 cup. I'm going to empty it out into my bowl so that I can work with it. The dough. So I'm just trying to soften it up. So I am now going to just wipe the utensil since I need all the quantity. Set that aside. Now I'm just going to work with my hands. Okay? And typically you want to just work with one hand and have one hand free so that you don't have a big mess until you get a nice fluffy uniform consistency. So you probably will have to work on this maybe, I don't know, 5-10 minutes depending on the temperature and the conditions of the shortening that you're starting with. But once you see that you have a nice fluffy consistency, which I think I have here, there's a few little clumps, but I think it's pretty good. So what I'm gonna do now is basically grab my whole dough that I fixed earlier and put it inside. And now I'm gonna mix it and continue the process. So this is gonna take a little bit longer again, just to smear it all together. There is one tip though, I should say. If you, it is recommended that you add a little bit at a time of the shortening into your dough. That's better. So you have a little bit of regulation, because sometimes even the recipe calls for 8 ounces, you may need a little bit less. But here I'm just taking a leap of faith, making sure that it will work. And if not, I can always add a little bit more dough if I need It's going to take a lot of massaging to make sure that all your ingredients are fully blended together. And you want to have a cup with a little bit of water for testing purposes. So once you have a nice uniform consistency with your ingredients that you blended the shortening and the dough, you want to just take a little bit, just a pinch, and you drop it in the water, which I already tested. And if it comes to the surface, which this one just did, it went up because it's a little bit too big, it just went down again, then you're done. So that means that your balance of fat and dough is at the right ratio, so that when you steam it, you're gonna be in business. So that's exactly what you wanna be. So I'm just gonna massage it a little bit more, just kind of pat it to make it prettier. We're finally arriving to our step where you can start wrapping the tamales. I already pre-prepped these, so I bought them dry from the store, and then I just put them under water and had them soak in the water. What that does is it hydrates the corn husk, and then it makes them nice and foldable for when you're working with it. Now the other thing is, when you're looking at the corn husk, the inside of it is going to be smoother and the outside is going to be rougher. So you want to make sure that you set them as so. So the skinnier point, like the triangle tip, is going to be facing you, and the wider end outside, okay? Depending on how you work, so I tend to kind of work with it sideways, just because that's how I smear since I'm right-handed. So what I'm going to do, you can grab a utensil, grab, I don't know how much this is, but basically like a small, you put it in my hand for reference. So about the palm of your size of your hand there. And what you're going to do, I'm used to working with smaller leaves, these are bigger. So we are gonna need to just kind of go in the center of it and smear. And because this is going to be a larger size tamal, I'm gonna need a little bit of more of that. So just smear it on it. So, like so. And a tip is you can use your fingers to just kind of proportion it. So I'm gonna put a little bit more on the tip. So you want it to be maybe about a finger from the edge. So you wanna leave some space. Now if your leaf is too big, you can always trim it at the end. So what you're going to do is approximately lay it about, I don't know, a few millimeters thick, maybe half a centimeter at most. And I'm just using my hand to press it. So this is what it looks so far pressed. So it's about half, but it's okay if it's slightly more to one size. But the key thing is that you have enough space in the bottom, because that's gonna help you for the folding, okay? Now I have here in a container some of that filling that I explained to you how I did at home yesterday. So I'm going to grab about a tablespoon. You'd be surprised how when you're making tamales, it takes so little in the filling, but when you're eating them, it just feels about right, the quantity. So I was surprised when I was making them at first. I felt that I needed to put more, but really about a tablespoon is all you need. You put it in the middle, as so. You can use your hands, your fingers. And now, the way that I like to describe for you is pretend you're wrapping a baby. So what I'm going to do is wrap on one side, bring it close, and then I'm gonna lift a little bit the lip on one side so that the two sides of the dough are coming together, okay? And if you notice, I'm making a small tamal because this is how I like to make it, just small size. At the store, these are store-bought. You notice that the size is shorter but thicker and fatter. You know, it's really a preference, however you like to make them, okay? So I folded it, making sure that it's a nice tucked feeling. And then that bottom, you're just gonna bring it up. Again, you're going to pull the edges to make sure that it's nice and tucked. And you're going to look into the inside of it here to just check how it looks. So it's hard for you to see, but the key tip is if your filling is a little bit runny, you wanna make sure that you remove any extra juice. That's why I recommend to you that it's nice and thick and it's not runny, which is this case. This is very chunky. Now, once you have your tamal folded, you have to set them aside standing up. this is what we do with tamales. They have to be cooked standing up. When they're raw, they have to keep standing up. And that is how then you're going to transfer them later into the pot. You've reached the final stage of our tamales demonstration. So you're going to transfer them from your container into your pot. So you see these corn husks are very small. They're just little tiny pieces. And I can't make a tamal out of it because it doesn't wrap. But it doesn't mean you can't use them. So what you do is that you lay them in the bottom so that you just focus that heat that is coming in. So basically you're making a little bit of a nest. You can see there. Okay? You're just gonna put a few, not too many, because remember you want that steam to come up. It's just a few, okay, of those there. So I'm going to demonstrate how to pack them up with these ones that are shorter. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna pack them as so, just standing against each other, okay, until you have all your tamales close together, okay? Then, what you're gonna do with extra leaves, or you may need to just use some of the nice large ones, is you're going to pack the top of it with your leaves so that at the end, on the top, you have this layer, this secondary nest on top. So when you cover them, you're trying to compress as much as that steam as it's coming up, it's staying with the tamales and it's cooking. That's really important. Now, another tip that I like to suggest is that you grab one of your kitchen towels, you wet it, and carefully, because remember there's going to be a flame underneath, carefully, because it's wet and it's heavy, you can actually set it 1 or 2 towels around the edge so that also any steam that might want to get out stays in the pot, okay? Make sure that you have, maybe depending on your pot, 1 or 2 cups of water. Boil the water first. Once it's boiling, then you set up everything that I just indicated. So you have your step, you have your leaves, you have your tamales, you pack them closely together, and you set up everything. And you can set it up for maybe an hour to start. You've come to the end after 2-3 hours of steaming your tamales. They're finally ready for you to enjoy. The way you know that they're ready is that you'll see that they're fully cooked. So they're gonna be a little bit swollen, just baked like a cake, and they're gonna feel firm. Now, if you see any runniness, that they're still soft, then set them for more time. But if you see that firmness, they're ready, then you can unwrap them and put them on your plate to enjoy. So you're going to set it on your plate. You can just add a little bit of salsa into it, as so. Okay, a little bit of salsa. You can top it with a little bit of extra sour cream, some slices of avocado, and at the end, you're gonna end up with something delicious and nutritious. So thank you for joining us today with Veggie Plan A. We hope that you can try this recipe for yourself. It is labor intensive, but it's very delicious. Thank you for being with us today. Omito.